All right.
Okay.
Okay. Parshas Rei. Rei Anochi no saying lefnechem hayom brachu klola. I very often discuss the Mechilta at the very beginning of Parshas Rei. The Mechilta there says that there are a number of different girsas and a number of textual readings in the Mechilta, but the main textual reading, the one that we have, says that this can be compared. Where the pasuk says, God says, "Behold, I am placing before you a bracha and a klola, a blessing and a curse." The blessing, the blessing, the way Rashi explains it, if you observe the mitzvahs. It could also be explained that the main blessing is the mitzvah itself. In other words, you get the blessing because of a mitzvah, and mitzvah goreres mitzvah. One mitzvah it causes another mitzvah, and even in the mitzvah itself that you performed, that brought about the blessing, there's a blessing contained in the mitzvah itself. Okay, yes, haklala, but the curse, im lo shishmu el mitzvos Hashem Elokeichem. If you don't listen to the mitzvos of God, you don't adhere to the mitzvos. V'sartem min haderech asher anochi mitzaveh eschem hayom leches achrei elahim acherim asher lo yadatem, and you'll go after other gods asher lo yadatem that you didn't know. Now, and I think that the focus asher lo yadatem in regard to avodah zarah that you didn't know. It's not just that we didn't know it. Why did it have to add asher lo yadatem? It could have said other gods. I think the fact that the Torah, from time to time, and especially here, puts in the words asher lo yadatem, comes to emphasize certain points. And I want to explain one of those points. But the Mechilta, in this week's Sedra, he says, this pasuk that talks about God giving us today a bracha and a klola, and according to many mefarshim, many of the commentaries, these first psukim are not talking about the bracha and the klola, the blessing and the curse that was given in Har Grizim and Har Evel that's mentioned later on. But it's talking in general about a blessing and a curse. So he says this can be compared, the Mechilta says, that God says, behold, look, I'm giving before you. And it's interesting, the emphasis before you, it's not to you, a bracha and a blessing and a curse. It's the bracha, of course, if you do the mitzvos, the curse if you don't do the mitzvos, if you don't adhere to the Torah, if you deviate from the path, if you adopt the practices of those who worship idols. So the Torah says, so the Mechilta says, this can be compared to a person that's standing at the Eim HaDerech. He stands at the crossroads, and there are two roads in front of him. One road is Chiloso Yosher V'Sofa Kotzim. One road has thorns at the beginning. One road, well, either way. One road has thorns at the beginning and is yashar and is clear at the end. And there are other roads that are clear at the beginning. Paved roads at the beginning. The sofa coats him, but at the end there are thorns. And the question is, what is the Mechilta trying to tell us? What is the message the Mechilta is trying to tell us. And what was it in the pasuk that forced the Mechilta to say, we have two roads, one that has thorns at the beginning and is clear at the end, and the other that is clear at the beginning and thorns at the end? Why didn't the Mechilta just say there are two roads, one that's clear and one that has thorns? But I think the reason for it is, and I've mentioned this before, that the Mechilta was troubled. Why did the Torah have to say Re'eh? Look. Why didn't the Torah just say, Anochi nosei lefnechem hayom bracha l'klola? I am giving before you today a blessing and a curse. Why Re'eh? Why look? Why the focus on Re'eh, on looking? And I think that question actually could help interpret some of the explanations in the Medrash Rabbi also, in terms of the word Ray, not in terms of the full understanding of it. And I think that what bothered the Mechilta, this question, why it says Ray, look, the Mechilta wants to answer, when we evaluate a blessing and a curse, don't look at the very beginning, but look at the final outcome. You know, I once, many, many years ago, I read the biography of Menachem Begin, the autobiography, or if someone helped him outright it, I don't remember. And he mentions there that because of his Zionistic activities, he was arrested by the communists and he was sent to Siberia. And it seemed like a real curse. And many other Jews who had religious positions, Jews who spread Torah in spite of the communistic activities, and I could add some of the Jewish communists who worked against the spread of Torah, was sent to Siberia. And at that time, it appeared like a curse. But ultimately, that curse turned into a blessing. All these people, or many of these people, I should say, were saved from the Nazis, Yimach Shemam. They couldn't imagine a greater curse. Many of them, unfortunately, made the mistake that many of our ancestors made. They thought that the communists, who were really bad, were worse than the Nazis. But history proved differently. So sometimes a bracha, what seems as a curse at the very beginning, a klala, can turn out to be a bracha, can turn out to be a blessing. And there are times when something that's a blessing could turn out long-term to be a curse. I say very often, when we want to evaluate the worthiness of educational systems, you shouldn't evaluate it, and of course that presents a special challenge, just on the way these children act or study or accomplish while they're in school. But we have to evaluate it and making an analysis. What happens to them later on? And that's it's not easy. When you want to evaluate a road to see that if it's yosher, that if it's straight, it's smooth, it's comfortable. All you got to do is put your foot on the road. But if you want to know what the end of the road is like, you have to look with your eyes. And it's not enough to look with your eyes. You have to look with your head as well. You know, I was listening to the Democratic Convention, or I should call it the Democratic Party, because it was a party. And there was one thing that was emphasized over and over, and I'm not talking about the things that I knew that weren't true that was said. The changing of light into darkness and darkness into light. There was a certain idea that was said over and over again. And the idea was, we are not going to go back. We are going to go forward. Now, I'm not sure how they define backwards and forward. If you evaluate back and forward from the perspective of peace versus war, if you evaluate backwards and forwards in terms of people's ability to deal with economic situations, if you evaluate backwards and forwards in terms of safety versus being unsafe, I'd be honest with you, backwards seems to have been a lot better than the present. Not going to talk about the future. But I remember a time when I was in elementary school. And at that time, we had both Democratic presidents and Republican presidents, Democratic mayors. I lived in New York, and Republican mayors in those days. And believe me, the past was a lot better. In those days, a Jew didn't have to fear for his life, not just a Jew. The word past, present, and future shouldn't be viewed as just a word. You have to evaluate the way life was, the way life is, and why you believe the way life will be. Don't just take words, evaluate. There are those that are ksilim b'choshech yahalechu, fools, walk in darkness. They don't even look. They're only concerned about the next step. And there are some that even the next step, they're not concerned about. They don't think with their heads. And unfortunately, very often, they don't look even with their eyes. They walk. They just walk the same path. Yadashor koneo v'chamor reus folov. Yisrael lo yada, ami lo hisponein. Even animals. There are certain things they understand. They know where their food is. But there's some people that they just walk. They continue in the same path. And they don't realize that the path changes. And what we are challenged is don't just look at the next step, the step that you can feel with your heel. But you have to look to the future as well. And you have to, and of course, that type of looking is looking not just with your eyes, but with your head also. But there are some people that they just don't change paths. They just continue on the same path because they assume the way it was, even though it no longer is the way it's going to continue to be. And that is the ksilim b'choshech yahalecho. The fools who walk in darkness, who do not look. And it's very interesting that when discussing Bechira Chavshis, there is a big discussion how God was able to harden the heart of Paro. After all, one of the foundations of the Jewish faith is freedom of choice. Freedom of choice doesn't imply that we have a right to choose the wrong, but it implies that we have an ability to choose the right and to choose the wrong. And therefore, we bear responsibility for the choice that we made. The choice that we make, we are held responsible not just because of the situation at the time we make the choice. We are responsible to use what my father would have called interrogated vision. In other words, my father says very often, when the Jewish people are punished in the Midbar, in the desert, for the way they acted, for the rebelliousness, they're identified as an Am Kshei Oref, a stiff-necked people. What does it mean to be stiff-necked? If you're stiff-necked, you can't turn your head. You see only what's right in front of you. You can't look up. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. You can't look to the side. You don't see the past. You don't see the future. You only see what's in front of you. And you let those objects or those people who stand in front of you block your vision. How many people forgot October 7th? When someone says Israel has a right to protect itself, But what they did for 10 months, we can protect ourselves, but we can't defend ourselves. How stupid can people be? They hear such beautiful words. Israel has a right. And then they don't hear the rest of the sentence. What they hear is that Hamas killed only one day. They murdered one day. They raped one day. They put children in ovens one day. And the Jewish people murdered for 10 months. Didn't say that the Jewish people were defending themselves for 10 months. They try to trick with their words. And then they'll point back to it. But that's what we told you. But then they have, and I find no fault with a parent, but they have a parent coming to talk about how sensitive the American government is to the plight, the unfortunate plight of their child. I find no fault with them. I might have done the same thing had I been in their position. But I do find fault with those who refuse to see the full picture. Listen, when your son, your child, is in danger, I can understand the person not seeing the full picture. But others have no excuse. About Bechira Chavshis, the Torah tells us when Paro, how could HaKadosh Baruch Hu mechazek le Paro, or harden the heart of Paro, strengthen and harden? He was ready to give in. All kinds of answers the Sforna gives, the Ramban gives. But there's one answer given that I think is very important. And to a certain degree, all the answers are somewhat correct. So sometimes when you go on a road, my father would always mention the story that he took a cab in Washington Heights. He was going somewhere else. But the driver went under, either took a wrong turn or whatever it is, and the rest of the road led to the George Washington Bridge. And my father said, they knew before they got to the George Washington Bridge that they're going to have to go on the George Washington Bridge. But sometimes when you choose the wrong road, it's not easy to get off the road. The longer you're on a certain road of life, the less exits there are from that road. The less Bechira Chavshis you have. And that's the idea of Hayom. Renei Anochi no sein lifnechem Hayom brachot Lola. Today, when you're standing at the crossroads, there's a bracha and klola, but it has to be rei. You have to be able to look. Because once you're on that road, it won't be so easy to change paths. Don't we see so many people? Listen, I always, as a youth, as most of the Jewish community, supported the liberal ideology, because the liberals were tolerant. The liberals cared about the downtrodden. They tried to raise them. And I also was liberal because in many cases, the liberals were the greater friends of the Jewish people. Of course, sometimes we made mistakes. For my time, Jewish people made a big mistake about Roosevelt. Roosevelt became the Messiah figure for the free world. He was the leader in the fight against the Nazis, not because of any sympathy that he had for the Jewish people. But we became drunk. And because we became drunk, we lost contact with reality. And we didn't use our political pressure the way we should have used it. We became slaves. The unfortunate thing about a slave, that there is a certain tendency when a slave becomes used to a certain way of life, they continue on that same path. It wasn't easy for the Jewish people to perceive themselves as being free. So when we go on the road, we have to look at the end of the road to evaluate the bracha and the klala. Now, when it comes to peace, the word peace is easy. It's cheap. My grandfather's Atzal, Moshe Soloveichik, I'm named after him. It's also the yahrzeit of Rabbi, his father. My grandfather said, I don't know if he said it on the basis of his evaluation of life or in the basis of evaluation of learning, or the combination of the two. So we say, Bake Shalom v'Ratfehu. Search, it's commonly explained. Search for peace and run after it. Everybody wants peace. Chamberlain wanted peace. He thought that with his negotiations with Hitler, Yamach Shemo, he brought peace by giving in to Hitler, Yamach Shemo. Chamberlain's peace brought the world war. It brought the greatest destruction that the world saw. You think Chamberlain meant it to be that way? You think he would have agreed if he knew it that way? But Chamberlain used his foot to see what the next step was. Was there thorns? So for a couple of days, it was smooth for him. Not smooth for many others, but smooth for him. But even for him, even for England, it became full of thorns, loss of life, destruction. My grandfather said, Bake Shalom v'Ratfehu doesn't mean search for peace and run after it. Bake Shalom v'Ratfehu means search out the peace and then run after it. Make sure the peace is a true peace. How many peace negotiations have there been? How many times did the United States sit down with the Palestinians and the Israelis? And what was the result? They negotiated a peace, giving back Gaza. Israel moved out. Very similar to some of Biden's peace. That he moves out quickly before the lives of the soldiers moving out is protected. The peace treaty with Iran. The mother of all the terrorism in the world today. What did that do? What happened with Obama? What happened with Biden? We gave them the money that paid for the killing of the Jewish people in Gaza. We gave them the money that paid for the rockets that were sent from Lebanon with the goal of destroying and making havoc in Tel Aviv and on Jewish communities throughout Israel. That's peace. Yes, it's Hamas. It's the terrorist groups in Lebanon. It's Iran. But it's the United States also. Not that the United States intended to do that, but they stuck their foot out and they wanted to feel the road. And the next foot seemed to be clear. It seemed to them that there was no thorns. But they made a mistake even in that, in Biden's case. You look at the pictures of the people who were assured because of the help they gave America that when the Americans leave, they'll take them with them. How they run after the planes. What does that do for the impact that America has on the rest of the world? Who can trust America? Even the shore, even the animals, they know where their food is out of habit. And they know where the thorns are out of habit. But it seems that some Jews, they just go along the same path. They go along the same path. They don't look. Lo Hisbonim, they don't look. They don't even look. Now, but the question is, why is it that we Jewish people sometimes don't even look? I mean, after generations and generations of being betrayed, and we were betrayed, why is it that way? I want to suggest that to a certain degree, this comes in this week's Sedra. When Hashem, your God, will cut down the nations where you come to drive them away before you, and you drive them away and settle the land. Beware for yourself, lest you be attracted after them, after they have been destroyed before you, and lest you seek out their God, saying, how did these nations worship their God? And even I will do the same. You shall not do so to Hashem your God, for everything that is an abomination of Hashem, that he hates, have they done, and to their gods. For even their sons and their daughters have they burned in fire for their gods. Very strange, very strange. It talks here on one hand of the Jewish people being successful in war. And I should point out, don't think that the Jewish people, when they went into the land of Canaan, were going to capture a land that belonged to the Canaanites, not only because God said, as Rashi's expression is, that I'm giving it to you now, they had it before. But legally, there were a lot of issues also. Because as we learn, Rashi tells us in Bereshis that originally the land of Eretz Yisrael was the property of Bnei Shem, the sons of Shem, the Jewish people, were the descendants of the Bnei Shem. But then the sons of Ham, that's Canaan, they went and they waged battle against the descendants of Shem, and they took control of the land. And Avram came to the land shortly after that battle. So when the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael, they were claiming not only a land that was theirs by virtue of the fact that God said it's theirs, but it was theirs by precedent also. And the Torah tells us that after you are rid of them, after they are defeated, after they will leave the land, and you will not have to encounter them again. They no longer represent a threat to you. Even after that, Hishamar lecha, beware for yourself, lest you be attracted after them, after they have been destroyed before you. They're destroyed already. And you're going to find their way of life attractive. Seems very strange. But it's really not so strange. Very often, when we have to battle a nation, when we have to go to war against a nation, when we have enemies who hate us, who are ready to sacrifice themselves to destroy the Jewish people. And this is true not just with the Jewish people. For the Jewish people, it's a little bit more extreme. But very often, the victorious nation, the nation that is victorious in war, has a tendency to adapt the practices of the nations that they defeated. That's why on Yom HaKippurim, at Mincha time, We read the Parsha of Arayos, and the Torah tells us there in the Parsha of Arayos, Torah tells us to beware of the practices of the Egyptians. Jewish people were already successful. It was God who did everything, of course. They left Egypt. They left Egypt in ruins. But be careful, you'll adopt the culture of the nations that was defeated in Egypt. Be careful, you'll adopt the culture of the Canaanites who you will defeat. But as I said, this is not something that is only with the Jewish people. With the Jewish people, I think it's a little bit more extreme. But it happens also with other nations also. Rome defeated Greece, but Rome adopted the culture of Greece. In a sense, from a culture perspective, Greece won the war. And this is something that we have to fear. And the question is, psychologically, why is it that way? I wondered, why is it that way? And I think it may be in the unconscious. Initially, when they come in, they destroy everything. The Europeans paid Israel to leave all kinds of things to help the Palestinians when they left Gaza. So what was the initial reaction when they came in? Millions of dollars were spent. If it had been the reverse, you would have heard the outcry from the nations. They came in and they destroyed everything because they wanted to show that they defeated the Jewish people. They wanted them to believe that the war is still continuing. There is no peace. But we were stupid enough to believe that there was a peace. Why? Because of the United States. Because of all these people that assured us that we're very proud of the peace. Bakei Shalom v'Radfeyu, search out the peace first. Look what the future will be. And there wasn't even a present. They made up a future that didn't exist. Very similar to the mistake that many Americans are making now. It's easy to paint the picture of the future when you ignore the present and you ignore the past and you don't compare it to anything. You don't look neither with your brains nor with your eyes. You shut your eyes and you imagine. And this is the because we're not, when we understand Bakei Shalom, we run after peace, just the word peace, even though it's the very opposite of peace. We see there are wars all over today. Believe me, Afghanistan, look at Afghanistan, what the Americans did there. And to a certain degree, Look at the money that they gave Iran. Look at the equipment that the Afghanistan army has. What Israel could have done with that equipment to defend themselves. But when you use the word shalom and you don't search out what the word shalom means, then that is what happens. And what people don't understand, and I'm sure it's going to be raised, time and time again, the Jewish people waited. They waited till they were attacked first. The 6-Day War, the Jewish people had a preemptive strike. Yesterday, but today actually, there was a preemptive strike. How many thousands and thousands of lives were saved? Because we don't listen to the advice that's always given. I don't know about this case, but time and time, the Yom Kippur War, in every war, they say, wait till they attack. And when they attack, how many lives are lost? People make a mistake. The war of the Jewish people, I know what the Keren Orah says, and people probably misunderstand it. The enemy of the Jewish people from a nation that attacked them. Doesn't mean after a Jew was killed. It doesn't mean after they shot the gun. Even when they're holding the gun and they're ready to shoot, because it's a war of self-defense. Self-defense means when they are trying to kill us, we have to defend ourselves to prevent it from happening. Today, they don't have to cross the border to hold the guns in our head. When the missiles are being set up, when they have the ability to set up the missiles right away, and we know that, and they make no secret of their intentions. And it's verified. That's Milchemes Yisrael Miyad Tzor Sheboleihem. That's the war of the Jews for the enemy who attacks them. To be an attacker today, you don't have to cross the border. Times change, and the definition of being attacked has to change also. We're no longer fighting with bows and arrows. And this is what I think. They try to use concepts. Wait. And how many thousands of Jewish lives are lost because Jews waited? Baruch Hashem, they didn't wait this time. And very interesting that the Torah here tells us. Torah here tells us that Torah says after you'll destroy the enemy, you'll have a tendency to say, Eicha. Eicha, you'll try to understand them, to understand their religion. You want to understand. And you'll say, Eicha yavdu hagoyim eiles alehehem. I'm interested. Teach me. How did they serve their gods? And what's after that? The Esa came gamani, and I'll do the same thing. And there is a dispute between the Rashi and the Ramban, but both are true. Sometimes because of our interest in the religion of the other nations, in the culture of the other nations, because we focus on it with a positive light. And to some degree, we become one with them. So what happens sometimes, culturally, I eventually joined them. That's Rashi Pshat. Ramban says that I think I could learn how to mold my religion based on my study in the way they observe their religion. And it's all, again, what's the idea? The idea is when we win a war, we think that everything they had belongs to us. That gives us the power, the unconscious power of victory. I own not just their weapons, but to a certain degree, even their culture. I feel victorious when I take everything they had by choice, things that I choose only, of course. So first, I try to destroy everything, but then I say, no, it's mine. I feel ownership over their culture. I was against their culture before because I wasn't the owner of that culture. But now that I defeated them, I become the owner of their culture. Of course, I can choose a big. What to do? And the Ramban says I could take some of their ritual, some of their culture, and make it part of my religious culture. I can include aspects of the Christmas party in the Hanukkah party. I saw an article about 2 years ago from a Reform rabbi, a lady, where she suggested that Hanukkah be celebrated on the 25th of December. After all, Chafei Kislev, the 25th of Kislev. So they celebrated that to make it part of our culture. And sometimes when we get too interested in their culture, it leaks in. And when we're victorious, it's part of our feeling unconsciously that it all belongs to us and we can pick and choose what we want. And we admire certain things. We admire it if it becomes part of our culture. And to a certain degree, that's what Christianity did. They took aspects of different cultures and made it part of their culture. And I think that this also is, we take a look. But even when this is when we're victorious and when we're not victorious. When we're subject to the influences of the nations of the world. When we live in exile. And we don't have the freedom, the ability to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I shouldn't say that way, but we don't have the ability to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the way we wanted to. We don't have the ability to act as an independent nation. So sometimes, and we're subject to prison we begin to identify with those who 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 control us. We look up to them. It all comes from the bad self-perspective that we have. Both come from bad self-perspective. We think we can use them to make ourselves greater. And when we're downtrodden, we think that if we'll be like them, then we will be great. And usually that results in greater anti-Semitism. Look what's happening today on the college campuses. Jewish people were always welcome at the college campuses. The Jewish people were identified as the intellectuals. And today, they are disgraced. And it's very interesting. There's a Medrash Rabbah. I'm not going into details now, but the Medrash Rabbah says, as a bracha bes haklola, you get a bracha and a klola. He says sometimes the klola can be a bracha. Medrash Rabbah says, he says, the bracha is not limited to when you do the will of God. Sometimes, even when you don't do the will of God and you suffer the klola, you suffer the curse, you come to recognize reality. So the curse can become a bracha also, can lead you into a bracha. That's what it says. Rei enochi nosin lefnechem hayom bracha klola. Es habracha. The bracha. It doesn't say es habracha. The bracha that you'll get. Es habracha asher tishmu el mitzvos Hashem. It doesn't say im you listen, if you'll listen. But the bracha will be that you will listen. In other words, sometimes as a result of the klola, as a result of the curse, that will lead you to listen. In that case, the klola is considered a bracha also, could be a blessing also. But when it comes to the klola, when it comes to the curse itself, it says, im lo sishmu, if you don't listen. The bracha, both the curse and the blessing can be a blessing. The curse itself. But when it comes to the klola, that comes when you don't listen. In other words, well, we see an interesting thing. We became admirers of the culture of the nation of the world. We adopted their approach. We marched with them even against our own brothers and against Israel. And all of a sudden, these people who we looked up to, who we joined, all of a sudden, they're not letting us on the college campuses. All of a sudden, we're being discriminated against. All of a sudden, we have to realize that we're an Amskula. This, I was at that time at the demonstration in Washington, D.C. And I saw college children, college students there. They would never have been there in support of Israel if not for what they were undergoing. They used to identify with these same people that are chasing them off the campuses, that because of whom they can't attend classes. But they come to recognize that these are not their friends. People told me, I mentioned, their friends call them up, don't want to talk to them anymore. They remind them that they're dirty Jews. They speak on behalf of those that took little children in front of their mothers and placed them in the oven in order to give the mother aggravation of hearing her child cry. And then they, the murderers, accuse us of murdering when we rise up in self-defense. They only did it for one day. What is unfortunate is because they just kill at random, making no differences, not warnings, not anything. They might need only one day. Why did Israel need 5-10 months? Because we try. We try our hardest, more than any other nation in the world, not to kill where it's not necessary. We only do it in self-defense. So that Manuvelis, she says, what happened in Gaza for 10 months, who caused it? Who told them to place rockets where their children are in the schools? Who told them to place rockets in the hospitals? When someone shoots a gun at me, when I shoot a gun in self-defense, because someone is shooting me, and that person takes up his child and holds him in front of the bullet. It wasn't me who killed the child. It was that person who killed the child. Where does all this come from? Why is it that Jews didn't understand it? The answer is, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again, and I'll repeat it again. There was no person I saw that was concerned about the human beings, Jews and non-Jews, like my father. My father would talk against the throwing of the bomb in Hiroshima. He would be angry. I'm not taking sides on the issue now, but that was my father. A human life is a human life. But my father, his universalism emanated from his Judaism. The problem with many of our brothers and sisters, and they could be observant and non-observant, is that their Judaism emanates from their universalism. If their Judaism emanates from their universalism, they can demonstrate shortly after October 7th in favor of those who took Jewish children and put them in the ovens of the kitchen and take the shofar and blow it at the same time. They incorporate not just the practices of Avodah Zarah, but they incorporate into Judaism the killing of innocent Jewish children. And those who don't support Israel are partners with these people. The only thing I would suggest is that many of those so-called Jewish children who are demonstrating on behalf, many of them are mentally ill. Others are doing it for other reasons. They think they're going to find favor in the eyes of the Sonei Yisrael. And the truth is the very opposite is going to happen. Why don't we look at the end of the road, especially when it comes to peace? We don't look at the end of the road because we want to find favor in the eyes of these people. We have a very bad self-perception. And we evaluate everything on the basis of universalism. And there's an attitude that our Judaism has to emanate from our universalism. So we don't look at the end of the road. We don't recognize what's happening. But if we will recognize that our universalism, we have to be concerned about all mankind, but our universalism has to emanate from our Judaism. And if our universalism emanates from our Judaism, then we look at the road, at the end of the road, Bakei Shalom v'Radfehu, search out the peace and then run after it. Because if it's not a true peace, it's going to end up in a disaster, not just for the Jewish people, but for the whole world as well.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. Are there any Jews nowadays who oppose Israel who would have the status of Tinok Shenishba?
Even if there are, we have to come out against them, because those who oppose the Jewish people, they are giving strength to murder. So right now is not the time to be sympathetic to those who give support to murder. We can work on them later, but right now we have to, of course, we have to form an approach that will appeal to them, and we have to we hand out an olive branch to them, say we want them to recognize the problem. We want them to look at what the future will be. We want them to look at the past, the present, and the future, and put them together. To look what the Nazis did. I saw on TV and the news. Those people that were demonstrating outside the Democratic Convention. They asked one of the protesters, "What do you think about October 7th?" And his answer was, "What is wrong with October 7th?" And Jews demonstrate together with these people. In the Haftorah of last week, we mentioned that sometimes our destroyers come from within our own ranks. When you join with them, you are a destroyer. When we have an army fighting us, when we have an army that's fighting us, you don't try to get a psychiatrist before each person that you're going to shoot at to find out why he's doing it. There's an army over there. I'm not saying chas v'shalom to shoot people who are protesting, even sometimes rioting. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not necessary. Sometimes there are people who should be the ones to do it and the other people shouldn't do it. But we have to evaluate the situation. And when there's an army fighting against us, we have to fight the army. On an individual level, we can work with them. But when they come as a mob, we have to work against them as a mob.
Do you think maybe it happens to be that the Rashi at the that Rabbi started to share about the path is because Re'eh is usually, it's sometimes Rosh Chodesh Elul or it's Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, that it's a lesson for us about doing tshuva, that
I've said that in the past, that the idea, when you take a look, the idea of tshuva, you would think logically that tshuva should be, like you say, Elul, the end of the month, because we are trying to undo the past. But the emphasis, on the contrary, the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, Elul is preparation for it, but the Aseres Yemei Tshuva themselves is identified with the future, with the new year, because the emphasis, true, there's Charat al-Avar, but the main aspect, many of the Mefarshim point out, the main aspect of Tshuva is the Kabbalah Lahaba, the future.
No, I mean that the lesson of Rashi is that Elul is coming, and so to do tshuva, to make changes in our midos or in our things that we're doing wrong, it's like the long thing. There's no quick Band-Aid fix. It goes through the Kotzim first, but that's what we need to do to prepare ourselves.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it could be used that way. My sense, by the way, is that the Medrash Rabbah, most of it, I can't tell you for sure about Dvarim, but most of the Medrash Rabbah was by people who had the 3-year cycle, because the Medrash Rabbah generally is a Eretz Yisrael Medrash, and Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael, the custom, the general custom, there were exceptions, I'm sure, but the general custom was to read the Torah over a 3-year cycle. So I don't know that in terms of the Medrash Rabbah, and whether it was it come out right before Elul, that I don't know. It could be, It could be in terms of the Mechilta, but it's the Mechilta. I don't know. The Mechilta was well, there's a question who wrote the Mechilta.
Whether it's the Mechilta de Rashbi or the other Mechilta,
Yeah, whether it was
they were
Rabbi,
Tanai Eretz
no,
Yisrael.
it's a this is a Mechilta by Rav or Rabbi Yehuda. There's a discussion whether it's Rabbi Yehuda or Rav or whatever. So
they were
that
Bnei
could
Eretz
be,
Yisrael.
huh?
That they were Bnei Eretz Yisrael.
Well, Rav was both places, so that's but so that's okay. That's that could be,
Can we explain again, please, the machlokas between Rashi and the Ramban?
The Rashi explains the Chumash that don't try to study the ways of the nations of the world, their religion. I think it applies even to aspects of their culture. The Esa Nochi Gamosa, and I will do it like they do it. In other words, this results in our being Oved Avodah Zarah, in adopting their religion. That's Rashi Shita. In other words, when I get too involved in studying their religion, I can focus. There's a greater likelihood that I will assimilate into their religion. Whereas the Ramban says that the danger here the Torah is warning us about is taking aspects of their religion and making it as part of our religion. When I was a boy, they used to talk about a Hanukkah bush, to give an example. In other words, to take aspects of the Christmas holiday and make it part of the Hanukkah holiday. You understand? So
I think Ibn Ezra in Akev, but below Savi Toiva El Beisacha says something similar. Even if you destroy the Avodah Zarah, but if you bring it in, you're going to get.
That's right. So that's the same thing. So both are threaten us. Both threaten us, whatever the pshat and the pasuk it is, but we have to be on guard. When we get too much involved, with them, it's one thing to get where it becomes necessary because there were times that there were debates and whatever it is. My father used to say there's a difference between friendship and fellowship. We could be friends with the nations of the world, but where on a religious level we have fellowship with them. When you have fellowship, your guard is down. And very often, the more we're involved, the more fellowship there is, the more our guard is down, and the more we're influenced and use aspects of what they assume. Because man is a social being. We adapt to the group. We learn from the group. We become part of the group. Sometimes we retain our own identity and sometimes we give up our own identity, but both are very dangerous. And I'm not sure in our time which is more dangerous.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi.